Welcome to the Alisa Childers podcast, where we equip Christians to identify the core beliefs of historic Christianity, discern its counterfeits, and proclaim the gospel with clarity, kindness, and truth. And I have just had the most amazing conversation with Katy Faust, who is the founder of Them Before Us, which is a global children's movement. And I hope to that as you listen to this podcast today, I think that many people will be challenged. I know that when I read through her book, Them Before Us, there were even parts of her book that really challenged me, where I felt myself getting a little defensive, but then I realized, okay, wait, what she's saying is right, and it's my heart that needs to change. It's a complete paradigm shift for a lot of people, because her whole approach is, when it comes to all issues regarding pro-life, IVF, surrogacy, parenting, marriage, all of these things are approached from the perspective of not necessarily what's best for the adult, but what's best for the child, those who can't speak for themselves. And so I was incredibly moved reading her book, Them Before Us, and I knew I had to have her on the show to talk primarily about the philosophy of Them Before Us, but to focus a lot on this topic of IVF, because this isn't a topic that I really haven't been given a lot of thought to over the years. It's a topic that I didn't really understand the science behind it, if I'm honest, until I read her book. And so her book really helped me to make some connections and to think through some things. That's what I hope this episode will do for you today. Now, if you're watching and you have done IVF or you're considering IVF, my goal and my hope for this episode was that this would be not something that would make you feel condemned, but that would offer you a way forward, maybe to let you know some things maybe you weren't aware of. I just hope that this episode will shine some biblical light on some very tough and tender topics. And we do acknowledge and realize that these are tender topics for a lot of people. So I hope you'll hang in there and keep listening. I did want to let you know that we have received several comments that people are kind of annoyed by the ads. The ads, unfortunately, are necessary because it really costs a lot to do what we're doing. So we have those ads to help supplement what it costs to produce this content for you. But I did want to let you know that if you join us on Patreon, that's patreon.com/Alisa Childers, you can listen to our episodes early, and you can listen to them completely ad-free. So you won't hear the, us breaking in with our sponsor ads. You won't hear the electronic ads at the beginning. If you subscribe on Patreon, there's different tiers. It's not very expensive. So if that's worth it for you, you might want to check that out. We also do a little bit of bonus content with each of our guests, a little 5 to 10 minute bonus episode where the people who are in our Patreon group get to formulate what the questions are. So if you want to join us on that, that's patreon.com/Alisa Childers. Again, you can just watch everything now completely ad-free if that is something that bothers you. And again, so thankful to all of you guys who are leaving reviews on the audio platforms. That really helps us out. Appreciate you doing that. And if you like this podcast, if you find this content helpful, it helps us out so much if you do that. So appreciate that. And of course, liking, sharing, all of that stuff helps fine-tune that algorithm to get the word out to as many people as possible. So excited for you to hear this conversation that I've just had with Katy Faust. So here we go. Katy, so glad to have you on the show today. I've actually been kind of loosely following you for many years, very intrigued by your ministry and your approach to all things that have to do with the pro-life issue, IVF, children's rights, which you have started a children's rights campaign, which is so awesome. So I'm thrilled to introduce you to my audience today. Thank you for being here. Start by just telling us a bit about yourself and your ministry, and then we're going to dig into the details.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a joy to be with you. I've been following you closely, not accidentally. Like, tracing your steps, reading your books, cheering from, the virtual sidelines. So it's a joy to be with you. It's a joy to speak to your people. I'm very grateful for your voice and your ministry, your clarity. I like, God, more of this, Lord, more of this. People are always like, how did you get into what you're doing? And I'm like, it was a divine setup. Like I told you, never have charted this course for myself, but you can look at how God kind of pieces everything together to make something new. And I know that's kind of really similar to some of where you've come from as well. But, personally, I grew up with my mom and dad married until I was 10, and then they divorced. And then my father dated and remarried, and my mother immediately repartnered with a woman. So I split time between their homes and totally understand the children of divorce angle and the subsequent instability and the challenges that come along with blended families after that. I also really understand the LGBT world because that was kind of the world that my mom and her partner inhabited. And that was a part of my childhood, my adolescence, my young adulthood. Um, I'm very close to my mom and close to her partner as well. They've always been a big part of my life. Actually never really had any, I would say, major conflicts with them at all.
Yeah.
Like, everybody thinks that there's this big scandal of like, oh my gosh, like she's so angry at her lesbian mother or whatever. And that, like, yeah, I drop everything when they come to town. So, um, like I would say, a lot of people, if you Google Katy Faust, it'll be like woman with two moms campaigns for traditional marriage. But I don't have two moms. I have a mom and a dad like everybody else.
Yeah.
And God blessed me with a very close relationship, actually, with both of them, despite the splitting time between their homes. So what I am an expert in is loving people who identify as LGBT because I've been doing it forever. Sometimes I get these like blue-haired activists on Twitter that are like, you hate gays. And I'm like, oh, baby. I've been living with lesbians since way before you were born. So then I became a Christian late in my high school years. Really started to love and understand God in college after I met my husband, and moved to Taiwan. I had a postgraduate scholarship. I speak Chinese. I was an Asian studies political science major. And then when my husband was going to seminary, I worked at a Chinese adoption agency. So now I kind of understand the world of adoption and the importance of adoption as an institution centered around the well-being of children. And also very familiar with the very real loss that children experience prior to adoption, but that adoption, when it's properly understood and child-centric, is redemptive. Then went on to have my own biological children, three of them. Then God called us to adopt our youngest child from China. So now I understand adoption from the perspective of an adoptive mom. My husband has been in ministry as an associate pastor, junior high pastor, senior pastor for 25 years. So I have done all kinds of pre-marriage counseling, mid-marriage counseling, crisis marriage counseling, working with people who experience same-sex attraction, gender dysphoria, people who have unwanted singleness, dealing with infertility. So I've looked at all of these marriage and family issues from the shepherding and the counseling perspective. And then 10 years ago, I got really angry about how the world was approaching the topic of marriage specifically, as gay marriage being pushed, um, actually like on the backs of child loss, where they would say, kids don't care if they have two moms or two dads. And I'm like, well, hold on there. That means kids don't care if they've lost their mom or dad. And after working with kids in a variety of different ways, I'll tell you one thing kids care about. It is the fragmentation of their home and the loss of their mother or father. And so I started anonymous blogging because I was still totally afraid of what these people would do to me, because they will wreck you, right? They will wreck your family, wreck your job. They will try to destroy you, just in spirit, if not, in some other way that's more tangible. Um, and so I did that for a couple of years. And honestly, it was a mercy because I was creating content. I was blogging like crazy, and like 7 people would read my posts or something. And God let me work out a lot of these problems and flesh out my arguments in relative obscurity.
Yeah.
So that was great. Like I could make a lot of mistakes with not a big audience. And then I was outed by a gay blogger who doxed members of my church, actually, to try to silence me. But it was a story of kind of what the enemy means for evil. Because after I wasn't anonymous anymore, I was like, okay, well, now I can write amicus briefs for the Supreme Court and lead workshops at the United Nations and travel to Australia or Taiwan to like equip their people and advocate on behalf of children when they're, battling back the forces of family redefinition. So anyway, now I run a nonprofit that looks at every marriage and family issue, especially from the perspective of child protection, which means that at some point I will trigger you.
Yeah.
I promise you there's going to be something in this interview where you say, well, hey, what? Uh, that hurts me. And yeah, that's kind of how this works. If you elevate the rights and well-being of children above adults, at some point every adult is going to have to sacrifice. Every adult is going to have to decide, I'm going to do hard things on behalf of kids, because the only alternative is for kids to do hard things on behalf of us. And from a biblical worldview, we call that injustice.
Well, I just finished reading your book, Them Before Us, and it was literally a game changer for me on many levels because your whole approach being a flip of our mentality, right? So I think in our culture, we kind of see it as, oh, whenever we approach any sort of issue about parenting kids, it's sort of like the empathy is for the parent. This person just wants to be a mom or this or that, or just wants to be married or have this or that. And you're not kidding about the triggering, because even I, who, I was aware of some of these issues, but I read your chapter on step parenting, and I'm a step parent. And I felt myself getting a little defensive as I was reading through. But then I was just like, okay, hang on a second. This is good. This is really good what she's saying here. And it really forced me to look inside myself and say, hey, you know what? There were decisions that I made 21 years ago that were for my benefit. And one of those is that, people who know us know that my husband and I got married really fast. We, once we knew we were going to get married, we just eloped. We went off and did that. And I honestly didn't even really think about how that was going to affect my stepkids. And it was, of course, I'm just so thankful for the situation God has put us in, because they're such forgiving and loving and wonderful people, and they're adults now. And I've even repented to them for this in the past, but even reading your book really, kind of triggered some of that. Like, well, wait a second, I still need to look inside myself and repent for my part in my own selfishness. And so you kind of approached this on so many different topics. So give us just sort of the basic gist of what Them Before Us is all about, because it's not just about step parenting or abortion or IVF or any of these things. There's just this whole sort of paradigm shift in the way that we as Christians should be thinking about these topics.
Yep, you nailed it. And you nailed it in the sense that almost all of the decisions that we are making around marriage and family centers around the adults, their longings, their losses, their desires, their identity, their feelings. And the problem is that when you elevate adult desire, identity, choices to the ultimate, the kids will have to sacrifice. And so what we do at Them Before Us is we say no, even though the adults are struggling. And I mean, I'm never going to minimize the challenges of infertility or same sex attraction or struggling marriages. I mean, these are some of the greatest burdens that adults face. But ultimately, when we get these questions wrong, it's not adults who are the victims. It is children who are the victims. And so we have to elevate their rights, their needs, their well being above adult desires. So that's what we do with Them Before Us. As it relates to marriage and family, that primarily means elevating children's right to life and right to be known and loved by their mother and father. So that is what we do. We build out a worldview around child rights. We talk about why children have a right to their mother and father, why that safeguards children, why it is that if children are raised by their own mother and father, why is it that that sets them up for flourishing? Why is it that that exempts them from so many of the major social ills that we're facing today? And I'll give you a quick recap. If children are raised by their own married mother and father, number one, they're better able to answer the question, who am I? Because there is something about being raised by our own mother and father that helps us with that identity formation question. So it's very hard for kids to answer the question, who am I, if they can't answer the question, whose am I? Now, this is something that we've recognized in the adoption world for a couple decades. We have shifted away from closed adoption, where the child knows nothing, has no contact, no identifying information about their first family, to now in the United States, 95% of adoptions have some degree of openness, because it helps children with that identity formation, the who am I question, which is so critical for a stable identity. Okay. So that's number one, is it gives children biological identity. And that is something that all children long for, ask about, and crave. Number two, if you are having children raised by their own biological mother and father, statistically, what you are getting is the two adults who are the most connected to, invested in, and protective of them. So we have tried to wave away the importance of biology in matters of marriage and family by saying biology doesn't matter. Love makes a family, or kids just need to be safe and loved. Or if the adults are happy, the kids will be happy. So from the research, that is not true. Children are most likely to be loved when they are raised by their married biological mother and father. They are most likely to be safe when they're raised by their married biological mother and father. They are most likely to be stable, wealthy, productive, succeed in school when they're raised by their married biological mother and father. From an evolutionary perspective, or evolutionary biologists actually have a phrase for the disadvantage that some children who are raised by an unrelated adult experience, and it's called the Cinderella effect. And the name of it tells you everything that you need to know, that children who have a stepmother or stepfather or a cohabiting live-in girlfriend or cohabiting live-in boyfriend are actually at drastically increased risk of abuse and neglect. And I mean, this is undisputable, unfortunately. But I will say, thank God there are heroic step-parents who step in and fill the gap of an absent or negligent biological parent who say, I'm going to get into this relationship, not just because I love the children's mother or father, but because I know that they need that maternal or paternal love that they are missing. So we can and should recognize the exceptions. But generally, the rule is if you want children to be safe and loved, you want them raised by their married biological mother and father. And finally, the power of advocating for children's rights to the two people responsible for their existence is that they will, in 100% of cases, have the maternal and paternal love that maximizes their development and satisfies their longing for both mother and father love. So this idea that kids just need caregivers, moms and dads are optional, is fundamentally a lie. That children, get something different from a male parent and a female parent that will maximize their development in different ways, but also children crave the love of a man and the love of a woman. And when we see, for example, a little boy who grows up without a dad, he will find a man to love him. They often do. It'll just be a gang leader who has them run drugs. And if you see a girl who grows up without a father, she will find a man to love her. It will just be a guy who's loves her for 5 minutes and then ditches her. And that's why you see, for example, very high rates of criminality in fatherless boys and very high rates of teen pregnancy in fatherless girls, because somebody will satisfy that male love. It will just be somebody who is not as connected to, invested in, and protective of them as their own father. So if you understand sort of those fundamentals of what it means to be a human child, those are non-negotiables. Those are things that are unassailable in terms of the truths of kids. It's only then that you can then properly address questions about what is marriage. The answer is it's the only institution that unites a child's right to be known and loved by both their mother and father. Then you can have a proper perspective on divorce, in that sometimes it is necessary, but very often it is going to destroy or impact children's physical, mental, emotional, academic health, not because somebody was being abused or because there was adultery or addiction, but because the adults put their own desires above the child's rights. Then you can answer questions about modern families and reproductive technologies and have a proper understanding of adoption. So we try to lay this all out from the perspective of the child and what they need. And that will require that all adults sacrifice at some point.
Want to take a moment and tell you about my absolute favorite home meat delivery service, and that is GoodRanchers.com. I love the quality of the meat that I get from Good Ranchers. It's better than organic chicken. It's beef that is grass-fed and pastured, no hormones, no antibiotics, wild-caught seafood, heritage breed pork. And you may not be aware that when you go to the grocery store, even to get your grass-fed beef, over 80% of that is coming from overseas. But I love Good Ranchers because they partner exclusively partnership with American farms to give you pasture-raised beef, chicken, pork, and wild-caught seafood that you can trust. Support local ranchers and ensure that you receive high-quality American-raised meat with no antibiotics, no hormones, and no seed oils ever. And by shopping from GoodRanchers.com, you're making a statement about the kind of values that you stand for. Values of quality, hard work, and dedication to American tradition. Right now, Good Ranchers is running their presidential promo. That means for a limited time, you can get a free add-on for 4 whole years until the next presidential election. You can choose if you want free plain chicken breast or Angus ground beef or Applewood smoked bacon or wild-caught salmon in every order for 4 years. So don't miss out. Go to goodranchers.com. Use my code Alisa to claim this presidential promo that's worth up to $1,200 and bring 100% American meat to your family meals through 2028. Again, that's goodranchers.com. Use my code Alisa. And your book does such a good job of documenting all of these things. And one of the things that I really appreciated about your book, too, is that you're arguing from what is called a natural law perspective. And we haven't talked a lot on this podcast about natural law. As I was sharing with you before we went on the air, just about every time I take a class at SES, I have to write a little defense of natural law. It's very important for us to understand what natural law is. Maybe talk about that a little bit, and then from there, we'll go into the weeds of how this sort of ideal that you've described, which, by the way, just again to echo what Katy said, for anybody listening who might be in one of these broken situations, as I am, as a step parent, that she's describing the ideal. And I think for me, it's like once we get on board with the ideal, then we realize we live in a broken world. It's not always going to work out that way. So then what's the best way forward in the broken situation? And there are going to be people who hear some things we say today and be like, man, I did this thing that I realize now from hearing you talk or from reading your book was maybe not the best thing to do. What's my path forward? We're going to talk about that too. So this whole episode is not meant to condemn anybody, but it's really meant, my hope and my goal, Katy, is that people will listen to us today, and maybe if there are areas in their lives where they need to go, hey, I do need to repent. I need to set something straight here or make it right. That we can offer them a way forward for that too. But let's start with natural law. What is natural law? In other words, like your book doesn't really have Bible verses in it. We're talking about natural law perspective. Talk about what that means.
Yeah, this is something else that God allowed me to work out in the relative seclusion of anonymity, which was that even though I am like I'm the biggest Bible thumper you're ever going to meet. I carry my Bible with me everywhere. I try to read the Bible with everyone that I'm with. And I realized early on saying God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, did not advance the ball
Right.
when it came to these public policy decisions. In fact, it actually damaged your credibility and your ability to really speak into why everybody should care about this, not just Christians. So thankfully, I have been kind of discipled virtually or by afar by a lot of honestly Catholic thinkers, because the Catholics do have a strong natural law tradition. And this is like so well fleshed out in the academic realm, but I'll just tell you from my on the ground, layperson level, what natural law really is. It's a system of discovering universal moral truths by looking at the natural world. It's the how we ought to live, not necessarily based on special revelation, but general revelation. And so we make our case, our organization is natural law based, which means we are going to approach this from sources that is authoritative for everybody, whether that is the stories of children who have lived through it, whether that is the highest level of scholarship, common sense, social science. So you're going to see an obscene amount of footnotes in our book. And none of them are going to have biblical references. They're all going to be to different studies, stories, a few, natural law scholars that are going to explain this from the perspective of this is actually an accessible system universally that is going to apply to humanity, whether that's 2,000 years ago or 2,000 years from now, whether you're in Syracuse or Syria. So that's the power of natural law, is that I don't need to appeal to the Bible. But the amazing thing is that when you are arguing on behalf of natural law, which is based on God's world, it is going to perfectly complement what you find in God's word, because the two ultimately have the same author.
Yeah, and actually, natural law is very biblical for anybody listening to us who might be thinking, well, this sounds a little wonky because you're not going to the Bible. But let me just read a couple of passages of scripture that really get this, where we get this idea of natural law. One is Romans 1, starting in verse 18, that says, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness." And here's the part where we get the natural law. It says, "Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made." So people are without excuse. And so essentially what Paul is saying here is that there are certain things that we can know just by looking out at the things that God created, by looking out into the world. And this is what we refer to in theology as general revelation. Special revelation would be Scripture. That's God's Word. That's where we understand things like the atonement and the Trinity. But there are certain things about morality, about the nature of God that can be known. Psalm 19:1 says, "The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship." So there is definitely even a biblical case to be made for this idea of natural law and arguing from natural law, especially when you're talking to people who may not agree that the Bible is God's Word. And yet if you can convince them from natural law and get everybody on board to protect life and stand against this horrific injustice that is going on with things like abortion and some other things we're going to get into, Christians ought not be timid to argue from natural law. In fact, we've had Frank Turek on the podcast. He wrote an entire book about marriage that was only from natural law. And that's something that can be very persuasive to people who are not Christians, who don't believe the Bible is God's Word. Now, Katy, I'm guessing that most of my audience is on board with the anti-abortion ethic, right? We talk about it all the time. That's something you go into the book quite a bit. But one topic that I haven't really given much thought to until I read your book was the topic of IVF. This is something that is tender for a lot of people. Of course, I realize there are people listening to us right now who have done IVF. And what I would love to do is, it really was eye-opening. Your book really, because I think I had this sort of romantic Disney idea of IVF. It's like, oh, somebody couldn't be a parent, and then this enabled them to be a parent. And I didn't realize some of the seedy underbelly that is going on with the IVF industry. So give us just sort of a thumbnail sketch of what IVF is, like what actually happens when somebody goes in to do IVF, and then we'll start to sort of apply natural law and to that idea and talk it through.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important because obviously it has now become it's become an election issue at this point. It's kind of hit the national scene starting in February when there was a decision handed down by the Alabama Supreme Court that awarded 3 different parents wrongful death claims for their frozen embryos who were accidentally destroyed. And the Alabama Supreme Court said you can actually sue based on wrongful death as if these were children, because they are children.
That's right.
And then there was a national freakout, even on behalf of conservatives and Republicans, because once you say that embryonic children are humans that are worthy of dignity and protection from the moment of conception, you actually grind the entire IVF industry into a total halt. So that should tell you something. Why is it that if you were going to extend personhood rights to unborn children who are frozen, why is it that that's incompatible with the IVF industry? The answer is because IVF is built on the backs of more embryonic destruction every year than Planned Parenthood. And let's just talk about why that is. So, if you're going through the process of creating babies in a laboratory, IVF, in vitro fertilization, fertilization that takes place in glass, in a petri dish, that's what IVF is. You have to extract sperm, which is pretty easy. You have to extract eggs, which is much, much harder. That includes like hyperovulation, stimulating the ovaries to the point where they are releasing many more eggs than they would, not the typical 1, maybe 2, but maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe 30. If you've got, if you're fortunate, then you laparoscopically extract them. And then you want to go through the process of fertilizing children in a petri dish. Now, Big Fertility wants to maximize their success rates and maximize their profits. They're not concerned at all with the rights of children. They have to by definition, think that these aren't kids. And even if they are, it's not a pregnancy until there's implantation. And so there's all kinds of dehumanization that has to take place for them to conduct IVF in the ways that it's typically practiced. And it's typically practiced by telling, let's say, that infertile heterosexual couple, don't just make one or two embryos. You need to make 10 or 20. So, like, let's just fertilize as many as possible. And okay, wonderful. We got 15 embryos. And then what they're going to do is they're going to go through the process of grading those embryos. Which ones look the most viable? Which ones are going to make the grade? And maybe they'll say, okay, 5 of these, they don't look like they're good quality. We're going to dispose of them. But now you've got 10 that look like they are viable. But now that we've evaluated their viability, now it looks like you've got 3 boys and 7 girls. So obviously you don't need that many girls. And so let's just eliminate, 4 of them. So you can have 3 boys and 3 girls. And so we'll discard the other 4 girls because you're going to have to store the ones that you don't use. Let's say that you're going to implant a boy and a girl. Right now, we're going to freeze the rest. Okay, so now we've gone down from 15 little lives down to 2. Okay, 2 that are going to be implanted, several that have been discarded, and another 4 that are going to be in frozen storage. So now let's say that those 2 both take. Okay, they both successfully implant, but the boy embryo twins. Now you've got triplets. Okay, so carrying multiples is high risk anyway. IVF pregnancies are by nature high risk. Multiples are by nature high risk. So now you've got doubly high risk pregnancy taking place. And now you've got triplets. So now you're going to be advised by your fertility doctor to selectively reduce. That is abort, right? Somewhere between 12 and 20 weeks. And you're going to, the parents go, well, this is horrifying, but obviously this is very high risk now. I mean, triplets that are IVF, oftentimes in a woman who is past, she's in her geriatric pregnancy years. Maybe she's 37, maybe she's 42, maybe she's 46, because a lot of times people go to IVF because they have missed out on that prime fertility window. So she's got all kinds of multiple risk factors. She will be advised to selectively reduce. So maybe she will only be carrying twins forward on, but I'm just describing what is not an uncommon pathway for people that are pursuing IVF. And what you see is these little lives have to go through a gauntlet of hoops before they are even selected to be implanted. And then the truth is, those parents, let's pray that they actually do have healthy twins, probably that are going to be born preterm, because IVF children often are. They're going to spend some time in a NICU. They're going to need more medical care. And then those parents are going to be very busy with twins until they end up being 5 or 6 years old. And the parents go, okay, finally, we might be able to go back and consider getting those other 4 embryos. But oh my goodness, now she's 47 and he's 53. And now, like, it's a seriously high risk pregnancy, and we're already so tired, and we don't necessarily have the money to do another transfer. So let's just thaw and discard, or let's donate those 4 to research. I mean, the truth is that a lot of kids that are put in freezers never come out again. So what I've described to you is pretty typical of the IVF process. And you can see that you got 2 out of 15, right? Kids, 2. Well, and then, sometimes there's more that multiply. And so you've got a variety of different ways that children lose their right to life through this process. And it's not just permitted, it's actually encouraged by big fertility.
Yeah. How many embryos are currently frozen right now? Do you know that
So
number?
the estimate is 1.5 million. And the estimate is that 20 to 40% of them have been functionally abandoned. Nobody's paying their storage fee. They can't find the parents anymore. The problem with big fertility is they operate virtually regulation free. We don't exactly know how many babies they create. We don't know the fate of those babies. We don't know how many are donated to research. We don't know how many are thawed and discarded. We don't know how many are frozen forever. We don't know exactly how many are created using somebody else's sperm or somebody else's egg. A lot of what we have to do in the world of defending children's right to life and right to their mother and father from big fertility is piece things together based on crumbs that we get. I mean, like, even the abortion industry has to do a lot more record keeping and record sharing than big fertility does. And I'll tell you, they are taking advantage of that Wild West by doing all kinds of things, from designing babies to shipping them off internationally, to allowing all kinds of dystopic scenarios to take place now because nobody's looking at them, nobody's scrutinizing, and nobody's asking.
Want to take a moment and tell you about 7 Weeks Coffee, who I love for so many different reasons. I love that their coffee tastes amazing. It's mold-free, pesticide-free, shade-grown, low-acid, and organically farmed, and it comes from the top 1% to 2% of beans in the world. But baked into their name, 7 Weeks, is their pro-life ethic. They donate 10% of every sale to pro-life resource pregnancy centers all across the country. And this has saved many thousands of lives, and many more can be saved when you subscribe to 7 Weeks Coffee. They're also fighting against child labor and farmer abuse by sourcing their coffee through direct trade, which cuts out the middleman, allowing them to pay their farmers 300% more than fair trade standards require. So here's what you need to know. You can use my code Alisa at 7weekscoffee.com to get up to 25% off your order. If you subscribe to the Heartbeat Club, you're going to get an automatic 10% off your subscription. But if you use my code, you're going to get an additional 15%, making it 25% off your entire order. Go to 7weekscoffee.com, use my code Alisa. Again, that's 7weekscoffee.com. Use my code Alisa. So to play devil's advocate here, some of the things that you just described, you could see people avoiding. Like perhaps a Christian couple might say, well, we're not going to do selective reduction, which is abortion, right? That's aborting the embryos that are, I don't know, in the way or less viable or something. And maybe they say, okay, we're only going to make like 4 embryos and we'll implant all of them. And if we get a pregnancy with 4, then that's what we'll do. Does that ever happen, first of all? And do you think there is maybe an ethical way to do IVF? Is it even possible, in your opinion?
So if you want to talk about ethics from the perspective of no child's right to life is lost and no child's right to their mother and father is lost, it is possible. I would say that would look like only creating the number of embryos you intend to immediately implant. Nobody gets frozen. Because once you get frozen, there's a real strong possibility you don't come out. Or if you do come out, maybe the parents aren't able to or think that they should not parent them themselves, so they donate them to another couple. That's a violation of the child's right to their mother and father, even if you're preserving their right to life. So you would have to create the number of embryos you intend to immediately implant fresh, no selective reduction, no genetic screening, no evaluation about viability. If you choose to do that, you're going to fight your fertility doctor to do it because that is bad for them. It is bad for them to not have multiple embryos, to keep you relying on them and coming back easily for more and more and more. It is going to tank their success rate, their live birth rate, which is one of the few things they do have to share if you're not screening the babies that are put in, because those babies may not they may not thrive, they may not be born alive. So you're going to be advised against this by your doctor. Next, that scenario that I've just described to you is so cost prohibitive, even pro-lifers don't do it because they don't have the money to every single time they want to have another pregnancy to then extract the egg or pull them from frozen storage and create the embryos that they only want to implant. So I have now spoken to thousands and thousands of people about IVF in conferences, on podcasts, largely Christian pro-life audiences. So far, I have met 6 people who said, I did that. I didn't destroy any embryos. I didn't screen any embryos. We didn't abort any embryos. I didn't freeze any embryos. And 4 of them said, I had to fight my doctor to do it this way. Many more people said, I thought I was doing it the pro-life way. I told them don't destroy any embryos. But then later I found out, they said, oh, we implanted all the embryos. But what we meant is the viable embryos. And so it's not like you're going to be... There's not a lot of friendly perspective when it comes to dignifying children in the industry. So then it's like ethically, and actually from a natural law perspective, a lot of natural lawyers would say it goes against natural law to create babies in a laboratory at all, that actually natural law would dictate that children should be conceived through the sexual act. So if you want to appeal to the standard of children's rights, not victimizing children's right to life or right to their mother and father, there's a pathway for IVF. If you want to appeal to natural law as the authority, there's a possibility that you can't do it ethically.
Yeah.
If you want to appeal to what I would say is the long accepted theological perspective that sex, marriage, and babies are an indissoluble triad, and that God never intended any of them to be separated in any way, then from a biblical perspective, you cannot do IVF because it always separates babies from sex. And we can see that the devastation to children, just in terms of their loss of life, is overwhelming when we accept that as a possibility of making babies. So the answer is it's possible, appealing to a certain authority. It's highly improbable, and you probably don't have the money to do it.
Yeah. What does it cost to do it maybe the way you're describing, where you just make, I mean, it honestly feels strange to even say make the right amount of embryos, but, if you create the embryos, they're all implanted, nothing's reduced. What does that cost?
Well, first of all, you have to figure out like sperm extraction and egg extraction. And so that is going to be a whole nother ballpark. Estimates range, like there's a range of estimates, $10,000 to $20,000 probably for each round of IVF. So of course it makes sense to just do 15. You don't have $15,000 to just make two. If you're going to spend $15,000, make 15.
Yeah.
And then you can have them just at the ready if you need to implant them later. And then the transfer and the implantation is going to cost money as well. So, I mean, people go into debt. And unfortunately, success rates are very low. Depending on your age, if you're older, they're very low. But I don't necessarily look at the success rates in terms of how successful this IVF round is. I look at the success rate of how likely are you to be born alive if you're created in a laboratory. And the answer is we don't exactly know, but our best estimate is 3 to 7% of lab-made babies are going to be born alive. Over 90% of babies will not make it through this process. They're going to be thawed and discarded, donated to research, disposed of as medical waste. They won't survive the process. This is not pro-child technology.
Yeah. And as I was reading your book, I was thinking through so many different possible scenarios. Let's even say there's a couple who the egg and the sperm are from the mom and the dad. Let's say they create 6 embryos and they implant 3 for the first, and they don't do any of the, grading or any of that, just 3 for the first. And then they think, well, we'll put 3 on ice. But then you start to think, well, what if something happens in that first pregnancy where you end up having to have a hysterectomy, or like you mentioned, you're now 47, 48 years old, you can't really carry a child anymore. And then you think, well, you could possibly do a surrogate, or you could put them out for adoption. I've heard people say, well, we could just put them out for adoption. But with, over 1 million embryos on ice right now, it seems like the chances for that are pretty low, finding somebody to adopt. And even if you did find somebody to adopt, you're essentially giving your kids to someone else. I mean, I don't mean to be sounding harsh, because I know people are in these moral conundrums right now, and I want to be sensitive to that. But I do want to ask you about surrogacy, and then I want to ask you some tough questions about a way forward for maybe some couples that have done this. But that was something, too, that was just really eye-opening to me that I was reading in your book was, I think, again, I had this sort of Disney, unicorns and fairies idea of surrogacy, that it was just this beautiful thing that somebody could carry your child if you weren't able to carry your child. But you really showed why that is not ideal either. That's not a really part of God's ideal design. Talk about surrogacy and some of just the inherent problems with it. I mean, obviously, I think people listening to my podcast would be on board with saying we shouldn't be doing wombs for rent, for gay couples and things like that we see. But even for like maybe the woman who can't bear a child, so maybe her sister is her surrogate or her best friend or something like that, there's still ethical issues with that. Can you talk about that a little bit? In the world of progressive Christianity and deconstruction, one thing that I often observe is that many people who have deconstructed their faith, it doesn't seem like they were really ever taught to read and study the Bible for themselves in whatever stream of Christianity they grew up in. This is why I love Foundation Worldview, because we as Christian parents have an opportunity to equip our kids to read and study the Bible for themselves, and that is through Foundation Worldview's Studying the Bible curriculum. This will actually teach kids the skills they need to soundly read read, interpret, and apply scriptures. There are 10 lessons to help them grasp major periods in Bible history, 10 lessons focused on basic Bible study skills, and 10 lessons exploring how to correctly read different biblical genres. This is so foundational to our kids really having that biblical literacy that we're all going for. So if you go to foundationworldview.com, you can use my code Alisa for 10% off of any family license that they offer. Again, that's foundationworldview.com. Use my code Alisa.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there is way too much moral confusion about this on behalf of Christians, and it is having a devastating effect on, honestly, the commercialization and commodification of children because we are not clear on this. So obviously, just like every other marriage and family situation, there are high emotions. I would say legitimate emotions on behalf of adults. Longing to be a mother, longing to be a parent is really good. It just can't come at the expense of children's fundamental rights. And so we at Them Before Us are not going to look at it from the perspective of adults. We will look at it from the perspective of the child. So let me tell you what surrogacy is from the child's perspective. Surrogacy takes what God designed to be one woman, mother, and splices her into three purchasable and optional women. The genetic mother who contributes the egg. This is the woman who grants children their biological identity. This is the person who helps children answer the question, who am I? This is the person who, if the child is conceived through an egg donor or a sperm donor, they will say things like, I wonder if I've passed my mother. Does she know that I exist? Have I met her on the street and not realized it at some point? Does she know that I'm alive? Would she want me to her parents? Do I have grandparents? So that is the biological mother that tells children the answer to the question, who am I? The second mother is the birth mother. This is the woman with whom we bond for 9.5 months. This is the woman who lays the foundation of trust and attachment for kids. This is the woman, the only person the baby knows and wants the day that they are born. It is her smell, her voice, her milk, her body that statistically soothes children. It is her presence. It is her skin-to-skin contact that drops babies' cortisol levels and increases oxytocin levels. It is that woman who, if the child is separated from, immediately experiences hyper levels of distress, and even brief maternal deprivation in those early days and weeks can impact a child's brain. Children are made to be known and loved by their mother continuously from the moment of conception all the way through pregnancy, childbirth, infancy, toddlerhood, adolescence, adulthood. Okay, that's supposed to be continuous. When we interrupt that on the day that they are born, sever children from the woman that they formed that initial primary bond with, it can lead to increased risk of depression, anxiety, fear of abandonment, externalizing disorders that a lot of adoptees have experienced. And you can couple that with identity struggles if they also lose their genetic mother. The third woman that you can splice apart through surrogacy is what a lot of donor conceived children call their social mother. That is the woman who provides that daily maternal love, that feminine presence, that beautiful connection between mother and child, not just caregiver and child, that distinct female love that satisfies children's soul and maximizes their development. So what surrogacy does is it says, you can mix and match these three women, right? If you just need some other woman's egg, you just need the genetic mother, right? You're an infertile heterosexual couple. You can have the genetic mother, implant that through IVF. You can be the birth mother and the social mother. But let's just say that you are an infertile couple, but you're like, I can give you my egg. We're going to raise the baby. We just need somebody to fill in that third gap, right? The birth mother. We need that mother, but the other two we can take care of. So what if you've got a situation of a single dad or double dads or triple dads, right? Who are all needing all three. They need to purchase the genetic mother. They need to rent the birth mother. They're going to take the child home to a completely motherless home. So surrogacy allows for the child to lose at least one, if not all three of these mothers. The problem is none of these mothers are optional in the life of the child. Each of them offers something critical to the fundamental nature of what it means to be human. Sometimes children lose their mother to tragedy, and we mourn, and then we seek to mend that loss through something like adoption. Surrogacy inflicts that maternal loss intentionally and usually commercially, and we are calling it progress and we are celebrating it as a miracle. It is not. It is a fundamental injustice against children. And unfortunately, there is no form of surrogacy that does not inflict and require child loss because an adult wants something. Unfortunately, there is no case of surrogacy that should be endorsed, permitted, or encouraged from a Christian perspective.
Yeah, and those are going to be hard words for some people listening. And I want to say a couple of things. First of all, and I know Katy has said this publicly before too, so I can speak for her as well. One thing I want to be really clear about is that children that are a product of IVF or surrogacy are made in the image of God. They're not lesser humans. They're not subhuman in any way, shape, or form. Nobody is saying that. Nobody is arguing that. All children, all people are made in the image of God. But I suspect that there are some people listening to us talk today who are feeling, like you said, triggered, maybe convicted, maybe defensive. And I just want to speak to you for a moment and just ask you to pray about this. Just pray about the words that we're saying and ask the Lord to work on you, on your heart, show you truth, to shine light. You know, the Bible says in 1 John that we are to walk in the light. So even these very tender topics that have been born out of a lot of personal pain and things like that, we need to expose to the light of God's conviction. And so I would encourage you to invite that light to shine even in these areas. And the reason I say that is because we serve a God who is a God of forgiveness. He is a God, oh my goodness, all of us have been forgiven so much. And so there is a way forward. There's always a way forward when we have made choices in our lives that are maybe we come to see later were unethical. And there's always a way forward. So Katy, what I want to do is maybe talk to the person. I'm just maybe thinking about a woman who's listening to us right now, and she did IVF, and maybe she did it maybe she didn't even know what was all involved at the time she did it. Maybe she did, but thought that was maybe the best ethical choice, and maybe the Lord is working on her heart. Maybe she has embryos that are frozen right now, and now she's kind of in a moral panic, like, well, what do I do? It doesn't seem like there's a lot of options for that. So maybe speak to that woman or that couple that's listening to us that is feeling some tension with what we're saying today.
Yeah. I first want to say thanks for talking about the dignity of these children. And a lot of people will say, well, if you disagree with IVF or if you disagree with surrogacy, you're diminishing the worth of my child. And the answer is, I so hypervalue them that forms the basis of my critique of these technologies, because I actually think every child created through these processes are worthy of the same love, protection, and chance at life that your living children have. It actually is because I believe in their dignity to such a degree that I don't think that any child should be commodified out of existence, lose their right to their mother and father, donated to research. It is a child protective attitude that actually leads me to be critical of these issues. Thank God. Thank God. Your kids were one of the very few that made it out alive. I just wish every child had had that same opportunity. So this process of, okay, I've participated in this somehow. What do I do now? I talk to those women, right? The thing about doing this work is you hear all the stories. And I know the women that are in those tortured positions of saying, I've got 3 kids at home. I love them. You know, they're sitting around my table right now doing their homeschool work. And I have 6 more that are still in frozen storage. But now I'm divorced and my husband does not want me to have more of his children because now, you know, he's already paying child support. Or now I'm 52 and I am absolutely paralyzed because I can't give these kids away. I mean, what if these kids that I donate or even adopt, find another couple to adopt, what if they look even more like me than the kids that I'm raising right now? And, you know, we live in a really comfortable neighborhood. You know, we're living in a really beautiful house. What if my kids that are adopted out, what if they grow up in a trailer park and then they come to me and they say, why did you give me away and not them? What if they are acquired by somebody who does terrible things to them. And so they feel like they're trapped. They're not going to, they're pro-life, they're not going to destroy them, but neither do they feel like they can give them out. It's very, very challenging. And these are gut-wrenching decisions that a lot of people are facing. So here's what I hope for you. I just know that in my personal life and certainly in our shepherding life, as we have walked through very challenging issues with people, I always tell, especially the women in my life, you don't need to tell everybody everything, but you need to tell somebody everything, right? Find a trustworthy woman that you can tell everything to, every corner of those struggles, the rationale, the confession, everything. Don't you let one corner of darkness remain or secrecy remain, because that is the place where the enemy he will destroy you, right? With those little secrets that you can't say to anybody else. So first of all, you need to let it out in the light. You need to expose it to somebody. Even better if you can find somebody who has a little bit of knowledge on this information that can kind of walk you through it. Talk to your pastor. Thankfully, there are a lot of organizations now that are working to equip pastors. I know the Colson Center has a lot of good resources on this. The Legacy Institute up here in Washington has resources for pastors. There are now starting to be a little more information and material so that your spiritual leaders are going to be able to walk you through this and guide you through this. Let's say that you're on the other side of it, right? And you've got the children in your home, or maybe you are, okay, so you've been through a divorce, or you are on the other side of your fertility journey and you did use a sperm donor to create a child. Or maybe you are somebody that came out of a same-sex relationship who now is in the place of okay, I created these children with another woman or something like that. Here's the deal. Your kids have experienced loss and fragmentation and struggle. And some of it, maybe not all of it, some of it was due to your choices and your decision. So there's a very good chance that your child feels like they cannot be honest with you. They're not able to tell you honestly, it was really painful for me when you and dad divorced. Or even though I'm being raised by, you and my social father, I've actually completely fantasized about who my biological father is. And I've actually been on the internet for a couple of years now trying to figure out his true identity. There's a really good chance that they feel like they can't talk with you about it, because if they did, they would indict you. And there's still this natural level of protectiveness that they have for you. But I'll tell you what, same thing with you and your struggles. Children who struggle alone are in danger. Children who are wrestling through something that is deep and personal, if they are doing that in isolation, they are vulnerable. So what you want, this is going to be hard, is you want them to be able to tell you everything. You want to be the person with whom they share all. You want to be the person that goes to the dark corners of those rooms with them. Why? Number one, because they're going to get intimacy with you, right? Anytime we're sharing emotional information with somebody, we create emotional intimacy, and they need emotional intimacy with you. It is a trust building opportunity. It does mean you are going to have to shut up about the natural defensiveness that rises up in you when they say, why is it that you separated me from my biological father? Because I actually want to know who he is. That is going to be hard for you, because your response, your initial gut reaction is going to be, but do you understand how much I wanted to be a mom? I prayed for you forever and God gave you to me. I just feel like it was a miracle that you were even born. Stop. It is not even you have to make this a safe place for your kid to talk about their loss and their struggles. They've heard your story. They have heard what you think. They have heard your rationale for the decisions that you came to. Now you need to be the safest place for them to put their grief, their questions, their mourning, their struggles. They're going to need you on their side to figure it out. It's very interesting. There's one study that was conducted that compared outcomes between children created through sperm donation and children who were adopted. So children created through sperm donation were in 100% of cases raised by their biological mother. The children raised in adoptive situations were raised by neither biological parent. And yet, on this, on these metrics of mental health, closeness with parents, feeling like they could trust their parents, the adoptees fared better. And it's probably because they were able to speak more openly about their loss with the people that were raising them versus the kids who were created through sperm donation, who were in the closet, who had to deal with these issues alone. So my recommendation is, if you find yourself in one of these situations where you're partially or fully responsible for some brokenness or loss your kids faced, become the safest place for them to, share these burdens, because you will be burdened because you're going to hear it, but it means their burden is going to be lessened because of you. And I would say that's the best place to start.
That is some seriously good advice, Katy. I appreciate that very much. We are about out of time, but I do want to give you an opportunity to tell us briefly about your new book that just came out. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm sure it's great. It's called Pro-Child Politics. So just give us a little idea about what that's about and maybe where people can find that. But I just so appreciate all of your wise words today.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you're willing to have the conversation, because I know that it is a burdensome. I know that it's really hard things that we're talking about. And it's actually kind of goes against my nature in a lot of ways, because on that grace giver, truth teller spectrum, I'm a grace giver. I actually I don't like conflict. It took me a long time to get into this fight because I would rather just be friends with everybody.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, there is a fire in me to protect kids. And I would prefer to speak up on their behalf than be liked. And I pray that it never ends. But it's it is a supernatural work in me that that I'm here. And that's what I want. That's what I hope that I do when I go out and speak, is please let me accurately represent the rights, interests, motivations, and well-being of children, because they don't have a voice and they don't have an advocate, and adults rule the roost on all these conversations. So what we do at Them Before Us is we say children's rights and well-being needs to trump all the other things. And we do it in matters of marriage and family. But I've long speculated that this is actually something that should be applied to every major political issue. What if we prioritized kids? What if we put their needs and their rights and their interests first? What would happen? Because what happens when we do that in matters of marriage and family is we get politics right and we get personal decisions right. So that's what we did for Pro-Child Politics is I conscripted, 19 subject matter experts to talk about not just social issues, which we do. We've got life, femininity, masculinity, family, race, gender ideology from the perspective of the child, but we actually pulled in all these experts who talk about energy and the environment and the economy and debt and taxes and immigration and national security and policing from the perspective of, what if we put kids first? And the same thing happens. You end up getting great policy as well. So we rushed to get this out before the election, because I actually do think that as Christians, especially, our priorities for our civic engagement has to be protection of the least of these. And that doesn't just have to do with issues of life and IVF and family. It does have to do with things like ESG and digital technology and pornography. I think every major political issue, actually, from our perspective, needs to first protect the next generation. And if we do, an amazing thing happens. We both protect individual children, we enable their social thriving, and we also enable national thriving as well. So that is our most recent project. I'm only the editor. I got the smartest people on all of these different topics to write 3,000 very concise words about what would happen if we prioritized kids. So it's fantastic. It's sort of a primer on every major issue. I've had my kids read it, and now they're like, I can talk about energy policy. Oh, I know all about immigration. But it also helps us to start seeing the world through, let's prioritize kids, which I think really is one of the primary duties of believers.
Very good. Well, I want to thank my guest, Katy Faust. Definitely recommend her book, Them Before Us. I'm very interested also in picking up Pro-Child Politics to see what she has to say in that. I have a feeling it's going to be very insightful, just like Them Before Us was. If you're watching on YouTube, it helps us out so much if you subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. It also helps so much with that algorithm when you comment, when you like, and that goes for social media as well. If If you want to send this to people or share it out on your social media platforms, like it, comment on it, that all just helps fine-tune those algorithms. And a special thanks to the thousands of you who have left great reviews on Apple Podcasts and all the other audio platforms. Please continue to do that. It helps us get the word out to more people. We're so grateful for that. And if you want more, if you want to hear some more questions that we discuss with Katy Faust and with all of my guests, you can join us at Patreon. That's patreon.com/Alisa Childers, where you can listen to podcasts ad-free and get some bonus content as well. Again, that's patreon.com/Alisa Childers. And let's remember that as we pursue Christ, let's keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin. We'll see you next time.
So pray.